guys, what's up? This is Subtle Roy, and I'm here to talk about the newest champion in League of Legends, Rek'Sai. It's going to be primarily a jungler, although I think Rek'Sai could go top lane fairly easily. And I just wanted to briefly go over Rek'Sai's kit before I start talking about optimal item build paths and what I feel is the correct way to build the champion. So before I actually start explaining specific spells, I think it's most beneficial to go over Burrow. So Burrow is sort of the main mechanic for Rek'Sai, and what it does essentially is when you're unburrowed, you have access to your auto attacks and you're just sort of a normal champion, but when you're burrowed, your vision hones in and you can sense the movement of enemy champions. It's really cool. It looks like little pings. You can kind of see on this screen that the map is blacked out in a wider radius than it usually is, and that's because of the burrow mechanic. So what you're doing is you're sacrificing the normal vision that a champion gets for greater movement detection, and pretty much all the mechanics of this champion have to do with this burrow unburrow mechanic in one way or another. So from there, I just wanted to talk about the Q. In the unburrowed form, you can see it right here, it acts as a cleave around Rek'Sai and will deal damage around Rek'Sai. And it has decent AD scaling. It's a 1.2 bonus AD scaling, so let's say you have, what's realistic? 100 bonus AD. You could conceivably, just from the bonus AD scaling, be dealing an extra 100 damage on top of the 285 base damage. So I want to say that the majority of junglers are going to be maxing Q first. It's just an incredibly fast clearing ability, and it's only on a 4-second cooldown, so if you get any CDR at all, it's pretty much going to have 100% uptime depending on what your attack speed is. I think if you got 40% CDR to be on a 2.4 second cooldown, which all things considered is still fairly low. And in the burrowed form, Rek'Sai shoots out a charge, and the charge reveals an enemy for 2 seconds. So remember how I said that Rek'Sai can't see anything when he's in the burrowed form? Well, what happens is he'll see the little pings of champions around him, and he can shoot out the Q like so, and it'll detect a champion if it hits them. So this isn't really meant to deal a ton of damage. It has low base damage and low scaling, and it's really the only AP ratio that Rek'Sai has. So despite what Skara said, I don't think that Rek'Sai is ever going to make it as an AP bruiser. I guess you could make a case for doing a sort of weird attack speed hybrid kind of build, but even that is very gimmicky, and I don't think it would really suit the champion considering the other scalings. So Rek'Sai's E, I think, is probably the most interesting mechanic Rek'Sai has. So what Rek'Sai's E does is, in the unburrowed form, Rek'Sai bites a target for a percentage of overall AD, and this percentage increases based on how much fury you have, and when you hit max fury, it deals true damage. So this is really a game changer just in terms of Rek'Sai's ability to trade with different champions, what it says about Rek'Sai's build paths, because most of the time when champions have true damage, you want to find a way to let that true damage shine, because nothing is better than true damage. There's a reason that Vayne prioritizes attack speed, and this is just sort of the most optimal way to benefit from a champion's kit. But in the burrowed form, Rek'Sai creates these tunnels, and the tunnels can go over walls, the tunnels can traverse the majority of terrain, I want to say, And these tunnels, let me see if I can find a picture of them. This is a tunnel. They're fairly visible on the map. When you build them, the enemy team won't see them, but if they're spotted, I think there are little indicators on the map that'll let them know that there is a tunnel there. All they have to do to kill both of the tunnels, so if they step on either hole, the tunnel collapses, so both of them will disappear. And I think there's a 10 minutes timer on the tunnels, so they will last for quite a while. And I was watching videos of Ponce play on the PBE, and essentially you set up a system of tunnels through your own jungle to increase your clear speed. It's really cool, and it ends up working a little bit farther than that. So there's Void Rush, which I think is probably the coolest ultimate I've seen on a champion in a while, and I was fairly impressed by Kallista's ultimate. So what Void Rush does is you get this passive attack speed, which makes Rek'Sai scale really, really hard into the mid and late game, because all of a sudden, just like that, you basically have a Phantom Dancer's worth of attack speed, plus a little bit more. And also, Rek'Sai can, at any point in time, just slingshot to one of the tunnels. And it's really, really cool looking. If you haven't seen it yet, I would really recommend just checking out the Riot introduction of Rek'Sai. It's terrifying, the sound is amazing, it looks absolutely incredible. And I'm really excited for this stuff to hit live. So I think that's about everything I wanted to cover in Rek'Sai's kit. So we can get on to the next part, which is where I'm going to discuss what I believe are the best builds on Rek'Sai. So keep in mind that nothing I tell you is 100% set in stone. Every game calls for its own builds, and I don't think you should be building static builds anyway. I always tell my friends who build the same thing every game that it's not going to work out for them in the long run. But this is what I think is going to be the best generalist builds on Rek'Sai. So, oh, and they're all jungle builds. I don't want to discuss the lane builds because I think they're going to work out the same just without jungle items. So the first build I wanted to talk about, and the one that I personally think is going to be the most stable build for him, as in it's the easiest to be successful with, is a Bruiser build. So this Bruiser build revolves around getting an early Hydra, and after getting the Hydra, if you're doing well, you feel like you can afford to build more damage, maybe you finish the Skirmisher's Saber, and then from there it's essentially straight tank. I did exclude the 6th item because I think that as long as you're building a tanky item, you should generally be fine. So some things about this build. I think that Hydra is really, really strong on Rek'Sai specifically, because Hydra does a couple of things. So a while back, Bloodthirster was the highest AD item, except for Sword of the Occult. It used to give 100 AD. And after Bloodthirster got nerfed, all of a sudden, all the highest AD items, except for Sword of the Occult, which I think is still 100 AD when it's fully stacked, it might be 110, all the highest AD items only give 80 AD. So we're talking about Bloodthirster, Infinity Edge, and Essence Reaver. And right below those 3 items, Ravenous Hydra is the next on the list. Ravenous Hydra gives 75 AD, which is only 5 less than that tier, and it also gives that amazing cleave damage. And the cool thing about the cleave damage is that it synergizes extremely well with Rek'Sai's Q, because what Rek'Sai's Q effectively does is it's giving you a bit of a mini Tiamat to begin with. And this bonus scaling is fairly high in and of itself, so you're going to have the high AD from Ravenous Hydra really counting when you use Queen's Wrath, so it's very cool. And it's sort of like Nocturne's passive, where the champion already has a cleave built in, so there's synergy there with Hydra before you even build it. And also also, the other thing that's cool about Ravenous Hydra is since Rek'Sai deals true damage, and the true damage scales off of overall total AD, the higher AD you can get, the more true damage you'll be capable of dealing. And it's not negligible. It's a really, even with fairly low AD, like let's say you cap out at, what is this, 75, 45, so that's a total of 75 plus 45, 130 AD plus runes and masteries, let's call it 150 AD. With 240% AD scaling, when you're dealing true damage, that means you're hitting for, yeah, something like 500 true damage, which is ridiculous. You're going to be tearing through ADCs even with these 2 damage items. So Rek'Sai can deal crazy amounts of damage with 2 damage items, and everything else is just utility based. Other little things about this build, I think that Randuin synergizes well with Rek'Sai's kit. There's no built-in slows in his kit. None whatsoever. There's a knockup. That's his only form of CC. And eventually I'm going to remember that Rek'Sai is a girl, but since it's just an amorphous monster, I don't really see the reason for Rek'Sai being a girl. But regardless, so I think Randuin's is a good purchase. I think that it's always good for a Bruiser to have a Randuin's when they don't have slows in their kit. It just allows them to stick to their target. I think Spirit Visage is also fairly important on Rek'Sai because the heal that Rek'Sai gets from burrowing is going to benefit a lot from the passive of Spirit Visage. Spirit Visage is one of those items that's really sort of core on a lot of healing champions that are slightly tanky bruiser-ish. Like, I know that it's essentially built every game on Cho'Gath, Mundo, Zac, Vladimir, and I know I just named all AP bruisers, but it's still an amazing item if you have self-regen. I know Aatrox's build it. I know that it's another champion that's really fit. Sometimes Garen's will build it because of their passive. But yeah, I think it synergizes well. And the boots, I think that for a Bruiser, Ninja Tabby are just sort of the safe buy. If you don't know what boots to get, you can't really go wrong with Ninja Tabby because I think they're just generally a solid purchase if you're going to be taking hits. It is always a good purchase if the enemy ADC is going to be beating on you at any point in time. So the next build I wanted to discuss is building full tank. And I think that in general Rek'Sai does fairly well as a full tank. I don't think that you have to build damage necessarily. And I especially think in certain team comps he could just be this, you know, super gank, tanky initiator type jungler. And I think that this build is going to focus a lot more on CDR, because if you're going to play this tanky style, in general you're not really going to want to farm the jungle, you're going to want to just gank over and over and over again. So think of this build as, if you guys remember when the Korean tank Rengar build first hit the scene, it functioned very similar to what I think this build would do. It had to do with using early CDR rush in conjunction with ulting as soon as your ult is up, and coordinating your ult with team members, so that way you can gank lanes before they have time to respond. And I think that Rek'Sai also has similar potential. I mean, I don't think he's quite as subtle a ganker as Rengar. I think that the ganking from Rek'Sai is most likely going to be, you know, some sort of lucrative, find a way to get behind the enemy and create some tunnels and come back later sort of deal. But, so I think that the way to do this build path is you start out and get a Stalker's Blade, because Stalker's Blade is the best Hunter's Machete upgrade you could get in order to continue ganking. And after you get your Stalker's Blade, you are going to want to probably get a Kindle Gem, and possibly after your Kindle Gem and boots, upgrading to either Juggernaut or Ionian Boots of Lucidity, depending on what you need. I think that for a jungler, it's generally a good idea to get tier 2 boots sooner rather than later, because as a jungler, you're only as worth it as if you show up in time. You know, you're not going to do anything for your laners if the enemy laner is zooming around with Moby boots and you're sitting on tier 1 boots. So, part of the reason I think that Ionian boots are okay specifically on Rek'Sai and tank Rek'Sai is because Rek'Sai's tunnels provide a ton of mobility. And the tunnels on themselves, I think, started an 18-second cooldown, or maybe it's even larger than that. Let me check. Rek'Sai. Okay, yeah, so at the highest rank, the cooldown is 20 seconds, at the lowest it's 18, so if you take into account CDR, it'd be something like, I want to say 12, 13 seconds between each tunnel. So for Rek'Sai specifically, CDR is a mobility stat. CDR allows him to dig more tunnels, CDR allows him to ult more frequently, and his ult is global. So, just a hypothetical situation, let's say that you're ganking top lane, and you've just killed the enemy top laner, and the enemy jungler sees you, he ganks bot. So what do you do as Rek'Sai? You just instantly ult to a tunnel bot lane, and it's as if, you know, you were running TP. So this jungler really benefits from CDR, and considering that Rek'Sai's ult is on such a high cooldown, I think that it's completely reasonable to rush CDR. So, yeah, I think that's a solid build. So what I would say is, Stalker's Blade, Ionian Boots, finish your Stalker's Blade with the Juggernaut enchant, and then pick up the Kindle Gem from Spirit Visage. And from there, you're sitting on pretty much max CDR and can start building whatever tank items the game necessitates. If you need maybe a little bit more clear, go for a Sunfire Cape. If you need a little bit more utility against ADCs, maybe go for a Randuin's. And yeah, I think this is a very solid build. I think it's 100% viable. Whether or not it's going to, you know, be the most popular build, I'm not so sure, but I personally see value in it, so I thought it was worth talking about. The next build that I wanted to talk about is Assassin style Rek'Sai. So this build, I don't know if I can 100% recommend this build all of the time. I think that since Rek'Sai is a bruiser, bruisers can't really afford to build full damage unless they're snowballing, because they run the risk of just being too squishy and not getting to deal their damage because they get blown up before they ever get to do anything. So I think that if you are going to do this build, the most effective way to do it would be to build sort of a counter jungling style of Rek'Sai. So I think the way to go would be go Poacher's Knife. Don't look to gank, because when you're squishy, the last thing you want to do is run the risk of getting just counter ganked by the enemy jungler and blown up, because, you know, how much damage are you going to be able to take with this build? So I would say go Poacher's Knife. Immediately after going Poacher's Knife, go for the Hydra, and after the Hydra, I would say go straight for the Yomus, and from there the build is up to a little bit of interpretation. You could go the Last Whisper, or you could go for the upgraded Warrior enchant, or if at any point you decide that you need kind of some survivability, you can go for the GA. I think that if you are going to counter jungle, I personally would still support Ionian Boots over Moby Boots. just because Ionian Boots for Rek'Sai allow him to do some really cool things, and they give him more windows to create tunnels and sort of be a menace in the enemy jungle. So what this build does between the Poacher's Knife and the Hydra Yomu's kind of combo is you're going to counter jungle incredibly quickly, you're going to become a menace faster than the enemy team can deal with you, and you're going to be able to split push extremely well as the game progresses. So this build is really more of a split push oriented build. I still prioritize CDR because I think that Rek'Sai in particular needs the CDR if you're going to be going this fairly squishy build, because without his abilities he's just standing there autoing you, and he's not really a champion where all you want to be doing is autoing. You want his spells up. His spells are very, very good. And yeah, that's about it. I'll come back to this build a little bit later because I have more to say about it, but there's some other things I wanted to touch on. So these are some items that I personally don't like so much on Rek'Sai, and that doesn't mean that you shouldn't build them ever. I think that certain games will call for an item, and the necessity for that item will be sort of great enough to justify building it for whatever reason. So, but let me go into why I don't like these items on Rek'Sai overall. So for Triforce, my problem with Triforce is that you are essentially paying for stats that you just don't need. You don't need mana because he's a manaless champion, and you don't need ability power. The only ability power scaling ability is the Burrowed Q, and it only has a 0.5 ability power ratio. So for this 30 AP, you are at most dealing an extra 15 damage, which is actually not 15 damage because of magic resist, so it's more like, 6-7 damage, so it's completely negligible. And yeah, I don't think it's worth it. I think that because Rek'Sai has true damage scaling off of total AD, it's worth it to build the higher AD items, and I just wouldn't recommend Triforce. I think maybe the only time to build a Triforce is if you are really invested in split pushing and you need to 3-shot turrets. Then maybe build Triforce. But even then, I would recommend Hydra over Triforce, I think, to clear the waves faster. So take it with a grain of salt. The next item is Blade of the Rune King. And I think that people are definitely going to build Blade of the Rune King on Rek'Sai regardless of what I say about the item. And I think that's part of the reason why is because he has a decent attack speed boost every time Rek'Sai levels her ult, and it just sort of makes sense to build Blade of the Rune King from that perspective. I think that a lot of people like to build it on Bruisers because it provides a slow on top of dealing damage, so there's that aspect of it. And it's just it's a good all-around item if you only build one damage item. It has a completeness to it. It gives attack speed. It scales on its own because it deals percent health. It gives lifesteal. So it's a great item, but I don't think it's a great item on Rek'Sai. And the reason for that is, so Rek'Sai has really phenomenal AD scalings. And when I say phenomenal, basically what I'm saying is the real power within Rek'Sai's kit is by building enough AD to where your spells start to matter. And because the only attack speed Rek'Sai gets comes much, much later in the game, I just don't think that's enough of an incentive to build Blade of the Rune King. If you look at the champions that prefer to build on-hit damage, champions like Uter, Warwick, Shyvana, all of those champions either have something built into their kit that deals on-hit damage, so they're already incentivized to build attack speed, or they have some way of applying on-hit faster than other champions. Warwick has Infinite Duress, Shyvana has Twin Bite, Udyr has Tiger Stance. So these are all examples of the kit providing an incentive to build on-hit. And with Rek'Sai, that incentive just isn't there. There's really no reason for you to build on-hit on Rek'Sai outside of the fact that Rek'Sai is auto-attacking, and that Rek'Sai's Q is based off of buffing auto-attacks. But if you build on-hit, you're not taking advantage of the crazy AD scaling, and your true damage just isn't going to be as effective. So that essentially sums up what I think about Blade of the Rune King. I think if you desperately need a slow, build a Randuin's, or if you need a speed up, build a Yomu's, and just kind of avoid this item because it's not what Rek'Sai is looking for. It just doesn't provide enough AD, and I think that the synergy with Hydra is much, much stronger. And as for Wit's End, Wit's End is a really strange item because it has very weird interactions with different champions. On some champions it's hideously broken, like Warwick, but on the majority of champions it's just sort of mediocre. It gives a decent amount of attack speed, it gives good magic resist and decent on-hit damage, but I don't personally believe that that Rek'Sai is an on-hit champion. I think that he plays more of an AD castery type role where you're just looking to get the highest AD possible to make your spells more effective. So I just don't see this item as being good. I think in dire situations, like let's say the enemy team was full AP, build a Wit's End. Have a good time. But in any other scenario, it's a waste of gold, and it's a waste of an item slot. You could be building many other items that are just better than Wit's End. You could build a Hex Drinker. And yeah, I just think it's a terrible item on him specifically. Her, rather. And Iceborne Gauntlets. So this is just another case of an item with many stats that you don't need. You don't need mana, so that's one stat that you're paying for that's completely useless. You don't need ability power. And the cooldown reduction and the slow are nice, as is the armor, but I think that to pay for so many stats just to get the cooldown reduction and the slow is really just a waste, just an absolute waste of gold. And there's just much better things you could do with nearly 3k gold. And Righteous Glory, similar reasons. I don't agree with paying for mana. I guess if you desperately needed one and nobody else on your team was willing to build it, no. But I think you could get your support to build it rather than you having to build it if you really needed one as a team. And this one I think is probably where most people are going to disagree with me, but I don't think that Devourer is good on Rek'Sai. I'm convinced that this item has no place on that champion. And the reason behind that is, if you look at Rek'Sai, Rek'Sai has an incredibly fast clear time, and most of the clear time is due to Rek'Sai's abilities. Rek'Sai's Q deals huge cleave damage, and it's on a really short cooldown. Like, the cooldown is short enough to where if you get some CDR, you can just continuously use your Q and clear like a beast. So I think that if you prioritize Devour, and most of the junglers that build Devour build it before they build anything, what you're going to effectively do is you're throwing your AD scaling out the window. You're saying, I don't care about true damage, I don't care about my Q, and you're putting all your money into this on-hit build that really just isn't supported by this champion until the uber late game, where your ult attack speed starts kicking in. And maybe that's what you want, but I think that for a champion with such strong scaling, you're really shooting yourself in the foot by not taking advantage of it early, building that AD, building that CDR to take advantage of such great scaling. So I just see it as a lost cause, you know, it's a waste. And these are other good items that I didn't necessarily discuss. There's one extra one that I didn't list here that I'd also like to talk about. First one is Black Cleaver. I just think it's a good bruiser item. There's nowhere you can really go wrong. And I think for Rek'Sai specifically, the health, the high AD, and the CDR is just very nice. And on top of that, because of the way Rek'Sai works with his Queen's Wrath, if you build, let's say, one damage item as a full tank, and you build a Black Cleaver, when you pop into an enemy team, your knock-up is physical damage, your Q is going to spin around and apply the Black Cleaver stack. So it's a very, very efficient item for this champion specifically. And I think it's just a phenomenal purchase. I think that if you were to build the most effective item for your team as a tank, that's a damage item, it would be Black Cleaver, because it would increase everybody's damage. The other one is Infinity Edge. This one is more situational because it's so expensive. Infinity Edge, I think, is the most expensive item in the game, and I think that because Rek'Sai's AD scaling is through the roof, and because his true damage scales off AD, what you could do is maybe swap out this Last Whisper in the Assassin build for an Infinity Edge if you are splitting against squishier targets. And what it would effectively do is put your overall AD somewhere in the, I want to say, 250 to 300 zone, not including runes and masteries. So you're going to be hitting your true damage for anywhere between 700 and 800, which is usually 1/3 of a champion's health pool. So it's a very interesting build. I think that this is going to be a very niche build that you're not going to see a lot of. But don't quote me on that, because if when Rek'Sai goes live, he ends up being, you know, Assassin Rengar 2.0, I called it first. Just saying. But I don't think that's going to happen. The next item I wanted to talk about is Locket of the Iron Salami. So Locket is just a good item to build on tanks and bruisers. It's very team oriented. You can't really go wrong with Locket. It's just a great item. I always tell my teams that someone has to build Locket because I'm just so used to playing with it, and I'm used to the way, you know, champions feel with a Locket, because that extra magic resist is something you get used to. But I think that for Rek'Sai specifically, Spirit Visage is the better buy, because the self-healing is so vast that Spirit Visage is just going to improve on your already great self-healing. So it's an item that really enhances the champion, similar to the way it would enhance, you know, say Aatrox, for example. And Warmogs. Warmogs is an item that I'm really on the fence about with Rek'Sai, and I'll explain why. I think that for champions where they, within their kits, already have something that is a % health healing bonus, that Warmogs is amazing, because, like, take Mundo for example. His passive and his ultimate heal % health. So the more health you have, the greater health you're being healed for. So the incentive is there to build as much health as possible, and that's why you see a lot of Mundos rushing Warmogs. And all of this synergizes with Warmog's unique passive. But not every champion scales with % health healing. I think there are actually only 2 in the game, but I could be wrong. I think there's Garen and Mundo, and both of them are huge fans of Warmogs. But for the rest of the champions, the majority of the healing done is flat amounts of health, not percent health. So with flat healing, it doesn't matter if you build a Warmogs because your healing is only going to heal X amount. So if this is the case, Spirit Visage is the better buy because it's just going to increase that flat amount by 20%. And if you build Lifesteal, even better because you're just multiple things are benefiting from the Spirit Visage at once. And the last item I wanted to talk about is Hex Drinker. Hex Drinker, and I guess eventually Moth Malmatoris. I think that for an AD Bruiser, Hex Drinker is always going to be sort of the go-to item when you're snowballing, but there are magic damage threats on the enemy team, and you just want to have that little bit of extra beefiness so that way you don't die. I think Maw is just an awesome item for snowballing bruisers, and I used to build it on Lee Sin almost every game because I was so used to playing with it. And yeah, it's great. I mean, it gives, I think, 1% for every 2 max. So Maw gives a maximum of 95 AD, which is ridiculous, on top of its 40 magic resist and its shield. So it's a great item. If you ever end up dueling AP champions like Fizz or is any sort of AP assassin, it's a great go-to item. And I think it could have a place in a build as opposed to, you know, maybe even a Hydra because it's just a high AD item. And again, every game is situational. So all I really have left to talk about is the runes and masteries. So covering the runes fairly quickly, I think that this is essentially the page that you're going to want to run. There's going to be slight variations, but I think that for Rek'Sai specifically, this is by far the best page you could run on that champion. We have 3 AD Quints, AD Marks, Armor Seals, and Magic Resist Glyphs. You could run Scaling Glyphs if you're not too concerned about early ganks. In fact, I probably would run Scaling Glyphs. It's just this is like one of many rune pages. I don't know where my scaling one is. And if there were a slight variation of that I would recommend running, it would be something along the lines of... Let me see if I can find it. No, I don't think I can find it. It would be something along the lines of replacing some of these glyphs with CDR glyphs. And they could be scaling glyphs or they could be flat glyphs. It really depends on what you prefer. If you run flat, you could run what I believe is 6 CDR glyphs and get something around 5 CDR. And that's pretty solid. I think that starting with 5 extra CDR in conjunction with 5 CDR from the offense tree would put you at 10 CDR at level 1. And that's something you feel in your first clear. If you just want to optimize for the fastest clear time possible, definitely consider running that. I wouldn't go Armor Pen on this champion because Armor Pen doesn't take advantage of the true damage. When you have true damage, you just do everything you can to increase the true damage because, you know, true damage only has one modifier, and it's whatever it scales with. If it scales with AD, build AD. If it scales with attack speed, build attack speed. So for Rek'Sai, it's AD, so build AD. And as for masteries, I think that there's probably 2 viable pages with slight variations on each. The main one is the Bruiser Build. And this Bruiser Build is pretty solid. I think I'm going to end up running this page the majority of the time on Rek'Sai. So what it is it's 9 points in the offense tree, and then 18 points in defense, going all the way down to Second Win and Legendary Guardian. I think Second Win is actually really solid for dueling, and since Rek'Sai is a champion that has really good self-healing and also is prone to build lifesteal anyway. It's a pretty solid it's a pretty solid mastery. And is there anything else in here that sticks out? I think Fleet of Foot is more worth it than Tenacious and the extra points in here because Rek'Sai really benefits from movement speed when moving around in the burrowed form, because there's already 15% extra movement speed, or I think it's 15 flat movement speed. So any little extra bit you can get really helps out. And I would recommend running Fleet of Foot on Rek'Sai whenever possible. And yeah, all of these points in between I think are fairly standard. I opted for the extra armor and swiftness just because I think it helps the early jungle clears, along with some regen and enchanted armor, because I don't think 1 point in block is going to make that big of a difference. And it doesn't make a difference in the jungle, so I think blocking and yielding really are much better on laners than junglers. I just don't think it's worth taking. And yeah, so this page is fairly standard for Rek'Sai. I think you could take Fleet of Foot out and go all the way down to Tenacious if you were, say, against a very CC heavy team comp, like playing against the Fiddlesticks or something. But I think this is pretty solid as far as builds go. This is the generalist one that I would pick for Rek'Sai. The other one is a bit more risk heavy. So this is if you're going to play the assassin heavy counter jungle style Rek'Sai, and basically you're just looking to do damage, you're looking to clear camps and get out. So this just does that. It gives you everything. It gives as much damage as you could possibly have. And yeah, I think that there's a place for this, but generally I would go the first mastery page. And I think that this could work if you're just looking to speed clear the jungle and be a nuisance in the enemy jungle. And yeah, so that's pretty much all I had planned for today. And that was my first discussion and item build analysis for Rek'Sai, the new champion in League of Legends, and I hope you guys enjoyed it, and hope to see you guys next time.